Hey folks, welcome to As Far as I Can Tell, number 4 with the Great Baldini. We're lucky to have him here for he's carved out like an hour for us. And today we're just gonna just ask a couple questions here. How are you doing, Baldini? That's number one.
You, hey man, I'm all right. A little bit frustrated. I had intended to launch my first podcast last week and had some technical difficulties with YouTube, and so I've had been rebuilding the entire show, and then computer crashed while I was doing it and corrupted the file, so I'm having to start all over. It's kind of like this weird nightmare, and I spent all my life doing audio professionally, and so now to have it fail is like you know, I don't know. It's like the universe is going, "Hey, man." So anyway, so a little bit of frustration there, but otherwise, I'm making it. How are you, my friend?
Oh, dude, I'm good, man. I'm all things considered, I'm doing really great. I'm just getting along with school and slowly, moving forward with that. I got some more classes I'm going to be taking next time. And just, I'm just trying to get like a basic, teeny bit of education. I'm kind of looking for a job here. Haven't been looking too hard, but, I want to make sure I get my school stuff done, but I got too much time on my hands, man. I just sit around playing the guitar and smoking pot and thinking about conspiracies. So
There are worse things to do, I guess.
oh, for sure, especially for me, right? But see, these are first world Cadillac problems. But
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna chop it up today on human cloning. And that's this is it's virgin territory for me, but I kind of got some good questions to ask, and we might talk a little bit about fake history. So Baldini, as far as human cloning, a, what do you know about it? But B, kind of what I really am getting at here is, can they do it? Have we actually seen people do this shit?
Well, insofar as I know, the official story is no, it's not possible. Although there are people who have made claims that they've done so. There's a Canadian company that says that they've done up to a dozen human clones. So, I guess I could give you my take on it, which is from everything that I've seen so far, and my experience with, um, I hesitate to say the government, but the powers that be or whatever. But certainly some of those are government agencies. So my experience with them is that anything that they tell us that is possible, or even on the verge, they're at least 3 decades ahead of that in advancement, right? So they
Right.
don't open the kimono at all until that stuff is already well in hand, and that is pretty consistent across all the technology spectrums. So when they announced the cloning of Dolly the sheep, I don't know if you remember that. It's been in the '90s
And
that
that
they
didn't that turn out to be a fraud? Like,
well, officially, no. I mean, they did what was what is considered fabricated with some of their reporting on how they did it, but officially, they did actually make what was considered a. I guess it's depends on how you want to classify that. So what they did was take take some cells from the if I remember right, the bladder of the mother, and take that and create. Now they had, if I remember right, over 400 attempts before they actually got
wow.
the three that lived. I think there was over 400 attempts that they made, and so they took the embryo. They took a cell from the udder of
Mm-hmm.
the mother and put it inside of an ovum, and that's how they did it. And then they once they had viable placenta, or but once they had a viable embryo, they stuck that inside of a female sheep, and it went through basically a normal pregnancy. And this was done at the Roslin Institute in Scotland. And so it was 1996, I believe, but they didn't announce it until 1997.
I
Um,
remember, I was
yeah,
12 years old, but I remember it was a big deal, and I remember there was people that were seriously upset about it.
Yeah, because of course it opens up the doorway to human cloning. It was the first acknowledged mammal cloning, and again in the 90s. So since then, there have been several other mammals. A horse took, according to the records, took 814 attempts. Um, uh, they did. Frogs were the first ones that they claimed to successfully do. So keep in mind that in nature, there are numerous organisms that sort of self clone, right? So the cloning, I don't know if you're aware of this, it comes from the original Greek word, which means twig, right? So the practice of horticulture where you can take a twig and make a whole new tree from that twig.
So
So
it's like cloning is like a idea of like maybe a bonsai or
well, yeah, it's like from horticulture where you can take a graft, right, or
a
a piece of
clone, like
a branch of a
okay,
tree,
yeah.
and you can take it and turn it into a whole nother tree, right? So that's where the original word comes from, the clone, and it was they initially just there was no e on it; it was clone was kind of the English version of the Greek word, and they added an e at the end to signify the long O to make clone, and that's kind of what we use since then.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea basically is there's a number of methodologies that are used for cloning, primarily in scientific research now. What they use in cloning has primarily to do with DNA replication. So when you see a lot of stuff on these procedural TV shows like Forensic Files and that sort of stuff, where they're doing DNA matching, that sort of thing. So what they do is they basically take a small DNA sample and they amplify it, or they clone, make duplications of it, so they get enough of the sample so that they can identify it. What my take on it is that part of the reason for this is there. Um, I don't think it's as significant as they say it. In other words, it's not as fail safe. Like they presented this idea that this DNA matching is pretty much bulletproof, foolproof, right? And it's not. There are the best cases I've seen. They'll say like 1 in 100 million, something like that. Well, if you extrapolate the number of people that are supposed to be, on the planet at like
Yeah,
7 billion,
yeah,
right? So there could be 7,000 people who have an identical match, and that's assuming that their numbers are accurate, right? So,
yeah,
um,
for
so
sure.
that's a
And then
that's a
you get into things like the West Memphis Three. It's like, I mean, or there's even way more egregious examples of miscarriages
absolutely
of justice that have to do with this testing.
right. And so they've given us the idea that this DNA testing is absolutely bulletproof and solid, and it's not, right. So there's numerous cases where what happens is that like it's been shown now, and again, it sort of depends on what your threshold of belief is, right? In terms of who you can believe. I mean, this latest coronavirus thing is a is a great example of that.
Oh yeah.
Within the same media, they're telling you that we're all going to die, and also relax, don't worry at the same time. So it seems as though creating confusion is a big part of the whole thing. You're not sure what to believe. So
Mm-hmm.
depending on how what your threshold of belief is, there have been numerous tests that reveal that. Especially in women, but that women can absorb the DNA of men that they've had sex with.
So yeah, I've heard this. I've seen the
Yeah,
dirty memes about it or whatever.
right. So, and that's not entirely limited to women, but primarily women. But it can happen in that you have multiple DNA strands within a single body, right? And so, depending on where you get on how they do the testing, this could mean you could be all over the map. So, um, it is my take or my position at present that largely the use of these procedural television shows is to convince people that they can identify anybody and that they've got means and methods to absolutely identify, a criminal or whatever. I just don't buy it, right? I think that there's all the stuff that they're doing with the DNA sequencing. It doesn't it doesn't have a complete ring of truth to me. There's
But
part of it that's probably accurate, but the whole thing is um, it smells funny to me, and I guess
absolutely.
that's as far as I want to go with that. So when we come back to the idea of is human cloning possible, I think
Right.
that I think that it's possible and likely that they could create a living organism that would be, for all intents and purposes, fairly indistinguishable from another person. I don't think that they can do it as some of the people who now, like, I can't remember the guy's name that he's been all over the internet in the
Oh,
conspiracy theories that
oh yeah.
yeah, you
There's
know who I'm talking about, who
yeah, oh yeah, and I forget his name, but there's a bunch
he
of
wrote. Yeah, he claims he wrote songs for Britney Spears, and the
absolutely.
Queen has got these cloning centers and all this sort of stuff, and I just none of that rings true
It
to me.
and here's the thing, it doesn't to me, but I'm so inherently distrustful of the system, right? That I'm attracted to thinking like, yeah, man, the fucking queen is cloning people. She's droning out their memories and replacing them with fabricated things that never happened, whatever. All of this stuff, it's fascinating to me, but I'm kind of with this is one of those things where I look at it and I go, okay, the technology is it's there's something here. There's definitely like it's possible that somebody could do this. I could see if they were really had expertly fashioned the right way to do it, maybe they could do it. So, they might be 30 years ahead, but then I look at these supposed clones like I'm like, "Okay, dude, you got Hillary Clinton, which is a major power player. Who knows how much power she actually has, but she's a figurehead for all of these big agendas and egregores of liberal thought that like they need her. They could really use her for things. And then if you look at whatever those clones were on the last campaign trail, to me that's like it's people with a bunch of surgery that are probably fucking MK Ultra victims because
Yeah, or I just see them as doubles, right?
yeah.
Some of them don't even look that close, and they're certainly they behave differently. I mean, it's been shown historically that nearly every major political player, going back to the at least the 1700s, has hired body doubles for varying reasons, right? Mostly to keep themselves safe during public appearances and that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't that seems to be pretty straightforward to me. I don't consider that those Hillary Clinton things as clones necessarily. Than just hired body doubles. They could very well be MK Ultra or just on payroll. I mean,
Yeah.
who knows for certain? But kind of getting back to the idea of cloning and genetic manipulation, I do. My current take is that there is probably something to the idea of genetic manipulation, right? So if I go, my typical way of approaching things is to go as far back into history as is possible, and with the understanding that as we talked about earlier, that much of the presented history is fabricated, right? It's fake.
Hmm.
But if I go really far back into ancient writings, there's a lot of material dealing with chimeras and human animal hybrids, that sort of thing. So, and I mean, even in biblical scripture and the Bhagavad Gita, we find evidences of crossbreeding between species.
Yeah, and
So,
whatever we think about the Anunnaki or whatever, whether whether those are real or they came from space or whatever the hell that is, they had a bunch of genetic manipulation that is like
sure.
we could abstract a lot of things from those translations, but I understand that one thing that's really prevalent in there is they're fucking with people's genes.
Yes, that's the point I'm getting to, is that they whoever those beings are, and I take it as a given that there's some kind of being. Again, I hesitate to nail down exactly what you want to call them, but for lack of a better term, they seem to be malevolent generally, at least at least the ones who are in close interaction with humans, you want to call them demons or whatever. That's a kind of a category or whatever. That's a name that's been put on them. However you want to call it. There seems to be a group of them who are intelligent, long-lived, and have a lot of capabilities. And one of those capabilities is to genetically manipulate humans. That seems to
Mm-hmm.
be consistent throughout ancient history. So if I have if my threshold of acceptance is that those the consistency and corollary description of them across cultures and across time seem to be such that I can accept that there's probably something to it. There's a there, right, as Crow likes to say.
Mm-hmm.
I can accept that there's something to it. There's some truth to that. So with that given, and then you move forward, I can extrapolate that given that they have seemingly not gone away, and there are people who are currently serving them in whatever capacity,
Mm-hmm.
and with the advent or the acceleration of other technologies, I would suspect that it is likely that there is some version of that going on to this current day.
The
Uh,
yeah, the manipulation for sure is like that's we can see that, and we can see they're not really damaging things like they are when they're cloning them. It's not as hard. They seem to be capable of making like smaller changes.
Yeah, I would say in multiple changes and changes that we to which we may not be aware. And as I look at the newer, all one of the thing about this coronavirus things sort of seems to be the big push is mandatory vaccination, and mandatory vaccination carries with it the risk, since you don't know exactly what's in there, of it specifically being modified to do genetic manipulation of some kind or genetic mutation.
Oh
So
yeah,
I'm inherently distrustful of it, and nobody's injecting me with anything that I don't know what's
for
in it,
sure.
right? So that having been said, it makes me very suspicious of the whole thing. So I guess the short version of it is: are they doing human cloning? Fuck, man, I don't know. I don't think it's exactly the way. I mean, I usually my default position, Russ, is that whatever they tell us things are, it's not that. But they do tip their hand in things like sci-fi movies and novels and that sort of thing. But it's never going to be straightforward, and I find that it's never exactly upside down. It's never exactly 180 degrees backwards, but it's pretty close in some ways, so that I can sort of extrapolate that again, my view, or at least what I'm open to, is the idea that they are capable of some sort of genetic manipulation, that they're doing it as an ongoing basis. There probably is some attempt to do some sort of hybrid between these other critters, whatever you want to call them, and humans, likely to create a platform that's a better host for them. Seems to be what the trick is there. That there does seem to be, from all indications, the ability to overlay a personality on top of a sort of like a software hardware kind of combination. So if the physical physiology of the body is a hardware, the
Dude,
software would be the personality, and this is what like a possession would be, that sort of thing. um, that they're looking to create a way to make that easier or a better host platform for them. That seems to be the direction it's going, from all appearances. So that's my take on it. And so I don't think it's the direct kind of cloning where they're taking celebrities and making clones like you see in the Kanye video. People, a lot of speculation about that. There's a lot can be done with CGI. And I think that in many cases, the truth community is being played on, because there are people, once they kind of get into it, sort of like the Mandela effect.
dude, it's the blue
That once
birds. It's the
once you
blue.
once you see it, people get pretty carried away with it, right? And they think that everything is either a Mandela effect or everything is, they can really run with it, right? So
And it makes sense. Like if you just look at it once and you do a cursory examination without your bullshit goggles on, and you're just used to everything being bullshit, and you go, Oh yeah, dude, those blue birds? Fuck, that would kind of make sense. But then if you go and speak about those blue birds to anybody one time, you're a fucking fool. And you are. I mean, it's not you can't like avoid these things. And I think this might be like to make authoritative statements on these things, like, oh, this guy was he wrote songs for Britney Spears and he was part of a My Labs cloning operation. I think that might be one of these pitfalls, one of these like what Matt talks about, like the Pied Piper of the truth community, like the mud floods, look over here, human cloning, blue birds.
Sure. Yeah, I think that again, my position is I stay pretty open to everything, right? No matter how crazy it is, because if it seems crazy, there's a to me, it's almost as if the crazier it sounds, the more likely that there is to be some truth behind it,
At this point, yes.
because we've been programmed to think of things that are true as being crazy, right? To keep
Hmm.
us away from it. So anything that the crazier things sound, the more likely there is to be some truth behind it. But I don't accept anything at face value, no matter who the source is, whether the source is coming from the powers that be or the mainstream media or even the truth community. I don't take anything at face value. I'm going to do some research on it on my own and try to use good discernment and the preponderance of evidence to come down in a place where I'm comfortable now. There are very few things where I'm 100% on anything, and I rarely make statements of fact or claims of solid fact because I just don't know. But I can be to some degree comfortable with my position on things and go, this is the best I can see it now, right? So just like the name of your show, as far as I can tell,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
as best I can tell for the moment, I have a worldview that is consistent with what I've seen so far, and then I'm always open to new information, and I always reserve the right to be wrong. And then
Yep.
assume that because of data anemia, I probably am wrong, at least to some degree. So I'm always open to and always looking for new information to aggregate into the whole and hopefully distill some better, more informed position.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks for giving us your take on that. I'm glad that we got to unpack that, and now I kind of understand, I guess, what it is better, how they are doing it if they are. Um and yeah, maybe I'll dig into that some more at some point, or at least into the genetic modification, because that's interesting with the whole brain chip or whatever Elon Musk, like lone scum, calls that thing. You know what
Yeah,
I'm?
the cybernetics and transhumanism agenda does seem to be a big part of this. That there does seem to be a push toward this direction. I think if you back up and look at the agenda in total, and look at everything that is given to us as being um, desirable, right? So the things that we're told we should expect and be on board with are, vaccinations, space travel, aliens, transhumanism, implants, e-currency or cryptocurrency. There's a broad swath of things that we're supposed to accept as being potentially beneficial and advantageous to humanity, and that is on the that shows a positive step in human evolution. So, given those things, those are the areas that I find there to be particular danger in. If we're told that that's the things that we're supposed to absorb and be desirous of, certainly those are the things I'm hesitant about. And all the things that we're told to poo-poo, and those being the idea of anything blue, or that there is a spiritual world behind the veil, and the hypermaterialism concept, that we should not look at anything that connects us to the natural world, all that sort of stuff. So anything that tries to push us away from those things, that's where I'm going to naturally gravitate towards. So I am sort of upside down in the terms of whatever the world is leading me toward, I'm going to run away from, and everything that they're trying to keep me away from, those are the things I'm going to investigate.
Yeah, if Don Lemon sells it to you, it's probably a lemon.
right?
And so yeah, yeah. Let's dig into this the whole new chronology thing. And I am, I don't really have a great mind for detail, but I'm good with the big concepts. So I've got some good questions here, and you know, just give me your best take, because these are things that I see people in the mud flood community addressing them, but I'll get lost because there's so much shit going on with this whole Tartarian ancient architecture and whatnot. But here's my big question is like, it's clear that something happened in the War of 1812 was not simple. It wasn't as described. I don't accept that that happened as they tell me it did. I all this stuff about Tecumseh's comet, there was this orbiting body in the sky that was like affecting these battles and shit. And it wasn't just, it was people on different continents seeing these things in totally what I understand were maybe unrelated wars. Um, and so there's that, and that's interesting. But then you look all around the world, and from like the year 1800 to about the year 1813, there was gigantic political unrest. There was wars in most regions. There was almost like a ubiquitous flood of natural disaster and general unrest, which led to this kind of like Hegelian, order out of chaos. Somehow, all that shit led to what later happened. I think that was like the Industrial Revolution later, or something. I don't know. It led to the 1800s. Um, what do we think happened there? Why is it not in my family history or yours? Why did nobody say like, "Oh yeah, by the way, the whole fucking world changed."
It, yeah, there's it's an interesting thing that I find that in modern history, again, we are sort of led away from some of these stranger occurrences, right? So I wasn't aware of what's been called Tecumseh's Comet or Napoleon's Comet on the European continent until very recently. That it coincided with a whole bunch of really strange events. Some of the biggest earthquakes in American history occurred. Um, there were a vast number of really strange things. There were between 6 and 10,000 earthquakes in Central America. Central United States area, like around Mississippi, Missouri, the Mississippi Valley alone. Like a bunch of micro quakes, and some of them not small.
Wow.
Almost nowhere in history do you see anything about this, right? It's fascinating, and there's an enormous gap in modern history, and that's fairly recent when you think about it in terms of the entire historical timeline that we're given. That's not really that long ago, and for there to be such a big blinding gap, almost as much as the dark ages,
And we
right?
had we
which
had
which I
more
don't accept. I
paper.
don't accept the dark ages either, right? So when you talk about the new chronology, right, the Anatoly Flamenco timeline, I don't agree 100% with his findings, but I would say 80 to 90% of his findings I'm definitely on board with. But the
There
math is difficult to his equations and the way he approaches statistical probabilities is hard to argue with, right? So
y-
it's certainly I don't agree with the Scaligerrian timeline at all. That seems to be almost certainly fraudulent from top to bottom.
there's a
Uh,
there to what he's talking about. It's not
yes,
like, and this is why I was disheartened when I spoke to my philosophy professor, who he went to Gonzaga, which is it's a Jesuit university, and I believe Spokane. And the Jesuit schools are amazing. They're excellent educators. They're very good scientists. Now,
well,
I
Jesuits have taken over education almost since their inception. And I think it would be very easy to extrapolate why. When you take over the education and you are the ones teaching everything, you get to control the narrative.
So,
That,
and
that, that seems to be pretty straightforward to me.
I gave him all these quotes about, like, they're from diplomats and statesmen and preachers, ex-members of the Catholic Church, historians, philosophers, psychologists, and all of these people say these are the most nefarious, insidious, like surreptitious individuals on the face of the earth. No inhumanity is beyond them in the service of their goal, and they're generally immoral, and they but a lot of these people point out, like, they've invaded academia to the point where they wear the cloak of a teacher, they wear the cloak of a priest, they wear the cloak of a guy down at the bar. They're just, it's ubiquitous, they're everywhere now. But so when I spoke to him, I just told him about some of this stuff. I said, check out this new chronology. This guy, he's a mathematics professor at Moscow State University. He's still there. He's got a bunch of peer-reviewed scientific mathematical papers, and then he's written 107 books on this new chronology, which they say is pseudoscience. But I was like, just check it out. I think you have an understanding of academia, and this dude has like an eidetic memory, pretty much. He's very, very intelligent, and he looked at some of it and he said, okay, I'll take a look at it. And then I sent him a bunch more quotes about the Jesuits, like ones from Hitler, saying straight, he says, like, I patterned much of the Nazi party after the Jesuits. And then there's other guys in the SS foreign intelligence that are saying, like, the entire SS is patterned after the
Yep, the
Jesuits.
SS in particular was specifically patterned directly after it. Yes, I've read that.
So and so I sent him those, and then I said, did you get a chance to look at any of that stuff? And he just replied and he said, it, he goes, I just don't think it could be true. And you gave me a great, something, like, just, it vindicated me. It made me feel like, okay, I'm not tripping out here. You were like, fuck that guy. Tell him that an appeal to incredulity is just
Yeah, one of
that's
the worst arguments for logic, right? It's willful ignorance. I don't believe it could be true, therefore it can't be true, and that's simply an appeal to incredulity. That's terrible logic.
and he's a philosopher, but the thing is, I all I can do is feel for him. I can't, if he was like, if any of these guys were in on it, some of these people, I'm like, you're bad, what's going on, you're not pushing some agenda that somebody handed you that you're repeating. You're probably sitting there knowing, okay, this is exactly what this is doing, it's nefarious. But most of the educators, most of these people that are even very high up, they know something stinks there, but they don't know what it is because they've never fucking looked at it.
Well, in this guy's case, right, just again, I would say condemnation without investigation, right, is the pinnacle of willful ignorance. Whether he's aware of it or not, again, I frequently say that the higher the education, the deeper the indoctrination, because you're protecting your education, right? So you have some merit based on what you've learned, and you can't afford or abide that to be torn down, because then it takes away all of your credentials. So that's you can't abide that. So the more you become invested in a thing, the less likely you are to let it go. And this is true across the board, whether it's a belief system, a religious belief system, or whether it's an education system, whatever discipline you're talking about. The further and deeper that you're invested in it, and the higher in the ranks you go, the less likely you're going to be able to let it go. And that's just the way of humans and their ego. But when it comes to the Jesuits, there's certainly enough evidence throughout history, or at least through the recorded letters and different people, that's these are confirmed things. This is not any kind of conspiracy weird conspiracy. Somebody pulled it out of their butt. There's an enormous amount of confirmed skullduggery by the Jesuits. I mean, they've been kicked out of 190 countries.
No, no,
Nearly.
it's 83, but I thought it was 190.
Okay, I'm sorry. So it's 190 times out of 80 plus countries.
Yeah,
So
dude,
I conflated that. I'm sorry. It's
including the
190
states.
plus times they've been kicked out of countries. And yes, there's I think 70 or 80. Yes, something like
Including the
that.
states, and when they assassinated Lincoln, who he like explicitly said
Yes, let's say
many.
he openly and explicitly stated that it would be the Jesuits that who were out to get him.
Right, and he said several times, he was like, I'm surprised they haven't killed me yet. Rome has master assassins, and eventually they will. But he said something that I really liked, which was basically something like, if a man is living right, he shouldn't be afraid of how he's gonna die. He shouldn't be afraid of the Jesuits come kill him. Um, I don't know. There's, some of the stuff that the forefathers said, that these early presidents said, I really dig it. Like, I don't know, they could be the fucking most darkest, weirdest, nefarious Masons, but I like to think that these guys were involved in maybe a lighter side of the occult at that point, or there's, I don't know if it was just a different stage of the plan, but it seems like.
I don't know, Russ. I've been on both sides of that. There was a time when I really was into John Adams, right, and the things that he wrote in his letters back and forth to Abigail really impressed me. I was really taken in by it. The more I come to know in terms of the actual hidden history of the country, I do believe that they were in on some pretty dark stuff. On the other hand, it seems to be when you look at the thing in total, right? At the kind of holistic view. My take on it is that they were true believers in what they were doing, and so in part, some of the ideas that they had and some of their viewpoints were noble. In that they were true believers and they thought they were doing something good. I think that, like many, they are themselves deceived and unaware of what the true plans are, and then they're not
Right.
really truly in control, right? So that they are set upon tasks and on quests in such a way that they find it noble and ethical to do these things, even unethical acts for the greater good. But ultimately, they are themselves deceived in its ultimate goals, so that people can do all kinds of things, both noble and ignoble things, for reasons which might be, in their view, positive and certainly justifiable, but
I
ultimately not serving mankind. So I think the same is true with the founding fathers. There may have been very enlightened views by them, but ultimately the methods and means in which they chose to do it and the way in which they chose to approach these things put them at risk of being compromised, and I think that they were.
and it's
So
just, it's hero worship on my part. Like, it's not, it can be hard when we really look at things and all this political stuff around us, to it can be easy to like put these people that were far far away from us, like John Adams or Andrew Jackson or Abraham Lincoln, on some type of uh, pedestal, where I look at them like differently than I'd look at a modern politician for a lot of reasons. But the thing to me is that they were criticizing groups like the Jesuits and the Masons in American politics up until like actually very recently. Um, and I don't know. It seems like there used to be maybe more of a fight for the right thing, but then if you look at like the Jesuit infiltration of the Reformation, and it seems like the all the fight for the right thing is almost always led by the bad guys.
yeah, they well, one of their open statements is that the best way to handle an opposition is to control it,
Hmm.
so that they immediately infiltrate it, so they control both sides of the equation. This is a very very ancient tactic. Um, when it comes to hero worship, I certainly don't worship any human anymore. Whether that comes to rock stars or politicians or any celebrity, certainly. But I do hold many people from the past in high regard, but not necessarily the ones who are held up to us as being shining lights of a great thought. But as I read letters and documents written by people, at least through from the 17th through the 19th century, they did seem to have a much greater sense of higher mindedness, if you want to use that term, their ability to think things through, and the ideals that they held were so much of greater value than the kinds of things that we value today in terms of what we find important. That
Mm-hmm.
today we are society seems very much idealized by how many people know us or follow us or are aware of us, what other people think of us in terms of their regard for us or how much material possessions that we have, and it does seem, from my perspective in my reading, that what was important in times past was the condition of the spirit and of the inner man, and what if there was a thought for what other people thought of you or gave you consideration, it was about, well, it had more to do with whether or not you were a good and ethical person, uh, and not whether or not you were a public figure or a like Kardashian or something like that, right?
Right. It was
That,
more
that
of a
it had to do with the quality of your character, and there was a time when the greatest possession that you had was your reputation, and not just yours, but that of your family and your family name. And now that couldn't be any further from the truth. So if there is any idealization of people, from my perspective, is that I hold those people in higher regard, and that what they were focused on was of greater importance, certainly, than what we focus on today.
and I'm probably not engaging in actual hero worship, but that's, I mean, maybe I am. What's going on is that I like, even though I know that like these people should be just as culpable or suspect in all the messed up stuff that I see going on today. I like to think that they weren't involved in it, and so I'll like lend myself to that belief. But the truth is, deep down, I know the same thing as you know. These people were involved in far greater principles, and they constitutionally had like a higher standard of thought and of social interaction, awareness, political awareness, um, culture. But yeah, they were humans just like the messed up humans today. And the thing is, if you get up there in politics, we've talked about this a lot. There's just no way you can't like once you get anywhere near the head of state, if you were a good person, you would run. You might not tell anyone about it, but you would certainly say, "I'm not willing to do this myself. I'm sorry, you guys. Like, it's too crazy."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've often, uh, you know, responded to the question of whether there's any honest politicians, with the response that I'm sure that at one point there were very many honest candidates,
There were
but
many honest what?
candidates for political office, right? So that at one point there were a number of good people who went into politics for righteous reasons, but anybody who reaches a particular stage, and from my perspective, doesn't it's not limited to politics. It's any place on the world stage. Anybody who reaches a certain level or threshold, that you are either in or you're out. They're not going to simply let a wild card be involved. You're going to be at some level compromised to go any further. That
Mm-hmm.
seems that. that's my perspective on it. Again, I could be wrong, but everything that I've seen indicates that to be true. And certainly, anybody that is held up by history as being, a person of noble character or of someone that we should idolize is either a complete construct or not what we're told.
Or like, and then I like where Matt goes with this, that there's things that could probably come down from Mount Olympus, like row, row, row your boat. The song is not, it's just not good enough to be here for 200 years. It's the life is but a dream is the pervasive part. And whether somebody organized that or that's just how reality works, um, that's a fascinating question.
Yeah, Matt from Quantum of Conscious, I think is who you're talking about. He
Yes.
he does have a terrific means of abductive reasoning, and I like the way he works backwards from some things. And again, like most researchers, I don't agree completely with everything he says, but much of what he gets to, I find that even though he works at it in a different direction, we come to similar conclusions, and to me that does provide some level of confirmation of where I'm headed, is that we've come to similar conclusions, but in very different directions. So that accounts for something to me. I think that we are getting to similar conclusions from different journeys. So yeah, I like much of what he has to say.
So let's the the whole like idea of flamenco, as I get like the basic outline, right? Just for a neophyte, the great unwashed like Russell, it seems like he's saying we cannot date anything back accurately past 1100 BC, and then he's putting forth more evidence that it looks like there's roughly 1,000 years, like a very minimum of 300, that are totally fabricated in the
I
Dark
agree.
Ages period.
Yes, I agree with that.
And
And dendrochronology would seem to confirm that as well.
what's
Um,
that?
Using tree growth, counting tree rings and tree growth and that sort of thing to count the years. And what they've done is with modern. Because they want to hold to the Scaligerian timeline, it seems that much of that has been compromised as well, and so they attribute a number of years of poor growth and that sort of thing. There was this tree. They've compromised it and polluted it. So, but if you look at it in a way that's consistent with actual dendrochronology itself, and if you don't compare it, if you don't go in it with the mindset of trying to confirm Scaligerian during timeline, it debunks it completely. When they go in trying to confirm it, and they come in with a perspective that's already set, then they change the. If the data doesn't match, they change the data.
If everything has to fit between the bookends, then if the truth falls outside of a bookend, but that can't be the truth because it's not acceptable to you for your purposes, then you can't move the bookends, because the bookends they're there. But you can, they can, it's acceptable to them to modify the data and pour it into these things, distill it until it fits in here, and they're like, this is the truth, and it might have some components of the truth, or it might be like a piece of it, but it's not the whole thing.
I see it as a very tenuous house of cards for us. That, from what I see, they're trying very hard to push an agenda and a story. And I mean, if you really look if you come from things at a scientific in a scientific method, anything that proves your hypothesis in error then your hypothesis is wrong. And there are thousands of cases when it comes to everything from paleontology to sociology, archaeology, that proves their timeline wrong, and they just go, it's an aberration, or we can't explain that. But I mean, everything from the megaliths of old to soft tissue in dinosaur bones. There's tens of thousands of data points that fall outside their story, and they simply either ignore it, suppress it, or change it. to match their story, and that to me implicates and implies fraud from top to bottom. If they're going to continue to hold to that story with evidence that is, you know, diametrically opposed to it and completely shows it to be wrong, and they're going to continue to hold to that, and not only that, but push out and end the careers of people who continue to pursue it. That stinks to me. Right?
It's
That
like
indicates that you're perpetuating a fraud.
it's like
So
magic.
I consider everything that they're pushing to be a fraud.
It's like magic or illusionism. Like if you go and you're a magician and then you tell the secrets, they'll fire you. They'll freaking kill you. It's
Yep.
not it's not acceptable to for people. But the thing is, it's science, so it should not be like magic. That's not in the spirit of science. Is like a pursuit of knowledge and truth and wisdom.
And to
So
follow the data wherever it leads. And the fact that they absolutely do not do that. And if you look at, for example, cosmology and read anything from Edwin Hubble, you'll see right away with his own writings that he found his own data to be unacceptable, and the horror of it. So when you see that, and that they absolutely threw out and reframed his own data to because he didn't like what it implied. Again, that shows that there's a problem. For a variety of reasons, I have come to be not only suspect and skeptical, but fairly dismissive of pretty much everything that the mainstream narrative puts out there, because it is all kind of lockstep together in telling a story that I find unbelievable. And for a variety of reasons, and so it's for this cause that I go looking for the data as best I can find it, and to turn over every stone, and we have to just kind of come up with our own narrative. There is a sense of wonder in that everything is now on the table. Also, a great sense of frustration in that that you'll never know for certain. But it's an endeavor that I've taken on, at least to better understand the world around me in a way that I can better understand and be comfortable with. And so that's the methodology that I've chosen, is to take the information that comes, and to establish a threshold of belief that's consistent with the data, and to go with what I see to be true, at least in insofar as I can accept it. So that to that degree, I would say that what I hold to be accurate or acceptable is very far away from the mainstream narrative indeed.
absolutely. So what about this actual mud flood stuff? Like here's my thought is that it seems like they had some active plasma, like the fasces. If you look at the old art, and Martin Liedtke or Ledke, whatever, on Flat Earth British, this I mean he's just done like a ridiculous amount of work to illustrate this.
Yep.
They have these things that look like coiled bundled rods. I don't know exactly how it works, but it's some type of electromagnetic plasma technology, and you can use that to displace Earth. Um, and these guys will come in, and they're on like gigantic bed pillows that their slaves are carrying in the middle of a huge war, and there's mud, and they're like holding these fasces or these rods out, different scepters, and there'll be things on these bed that are like little pillars that look like they're directing energy of some sort, and they'll just be mud all over the enemies everywhere. They won't be able to move. They'll just be covered in fucking mud, or there's like huge mudslides towards them. And I mean, when you see stuff like that, I'm like, I don't think these people were making an artistic interpretation of an intense war here. I,
I agree. If you take a serious look at the imagery that Lidke has come up with through these old books, and go through and just try to extrapolate the imagery, and what the artist was intending by that, there is some fascinating stuff, and you put it together with the star forts, with the evidence that we have of buildings that do appear to be, archaeologically unsound in terms of they they go down deep into you wouldn't build the building with windows like that, and
Yeah.
I know what Jason Lindgren thinks about it because his trip in New Orleans. I think that some in some ways he's just looked at the whole mud flood story from a couple of people and said, well, it's poppycock because it's not worldwide, or there's no. I don't. My perspective is different than that. I find that there is some evidence of some chicanery going on, and that the story being told to us is nonsensical, and what we see, the evidence that I see with my own eyes, both archaeologically and from these ancient imageries, does indicate that they're not telling the whole story, and the certainly the Antiquitech, as Libke calls it, does seem to be a thing. There's all kinds of evidence that, for example, these old fireplaces that were very ornate, that did not show any signs of burning in them, and there was all kinds of flammable things really close to them. The size and scale of buildings, the way they were constructed, does indicate that what we're being told. For example, the palace at Versailles and all these things all these enormous buildings that were built without sanitation, that in a way that we're familiar with in modern society, the sewage system and that sort of stuff. You can't have large cities without functioning sewage because it creates disease.
Does that get into the water technology that they
yes.
were? Okay.
So there's definitely something going on there. I'm not willing to make any claims about it, other than to say that there's definitely evidence that what they're telling us is not true, and there's a lot of evidence that is corresponding to. Again, the fasces is really interesting because it's current. I mean, it's current in iconography on American coinage.
Everywhere.
So if you look at the numismology across the board in coins from all throughout history, you see these fasces. So it's currently still on the American dime. So there's definitely something to it. What that is, again, I'm not willing or ready to make claims about, other than there's more to it than we're being told, and it certainly is fascinating.
Yeah, and I'll let you go. I'm probably had you for an hour so far, but I one last thing I wanted to bring up is there's a guy, Static in the Attic, I believe is his name. I think he's somewhere in like New Mexico or Colorado, and he's a hiker. He goes all around, but he started looking at the topography and the land masses all to the west of the Rockies. And then he started looking at, satellite photography or topographical maps and older maps. And he was able to show that there used to be all these bodies of water. There used to be these hills and mountains and stuff. And it literally, it kind of looks like somebody took like a broom of some sort and like stuck it down in the middle of the country right near the Rockies and then just dragged it towards the west coast. And it then the California is an island or was an island thing.
I've seen those maps.
That, I mean, it's just it's so hard to tell, but this is where I think we get into maybe reality breakdown, or it might be chasing our own tails. Like you know, I don't want to get into things like, for me, uh the personhood, the sovereignty is, I'm totally into it. I'm fascinated by it, but the more I get into it, I kind of feel like I am chasing my own tail. Like I don't I don't see people getting remedy in the way that I would like to get it legally, and the people I do see servicing their debts appear to be doing it under such duress from the system that I'm
That
like,
it creates more problems than it solves.
yeah, I'm like, okay, bro, you paid off your mortgage and now fucking everybody that has authority hates you.
Yeah, so good luck getting another house, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, to back to your comment about the Static in the Attic and the whole West Coast thing. This just leads me to, you know, I I hesitate to get into the reality breakdown thing that Matt looks at. I mean, I understand his frustration with trying to put it all together, and it just doesn't make sense. But again, I come from a position of simply believing that we have been lied to on such an epic scale, and that there has been so much effort made to occlude and to hide everything that has gone before us, that it's very nearly impossible to tell what happened beyond a certain date, and and that up to a period of time, much of these things could have happened locally, and other people would not have been aware of them if there was no means or methodology for information to travel beyond short areas. That a lot of things could have occurred that we would have been unaware of. For example, if you go back to again to Kemsey's comment that you mentioned earlier on in the program, right? That there were earthquakes of such magnitude. I mean, minimum of 7.7 in Missouri, right? And how often have you heard of big earthquakes in Missouri? Almost never, right?
Yeah.
And that these were not just regular earthquakes, but they were accompanied by sounds of explosions, lightning, thunder, all kinds of. I mean, it wasn't just like lights in the sky. In addition to this comet, and they were again 6 to 10,000 earthquakes, and a bunch, all within a very brief period of time. So, how often? Like, when did you hear about that? Right? Like, I never learned about it.
Yeah.
So the fact that this occurred in such relatively recent history and it was on such an epic scale, again, tells me that there's a lot of things that could have occurred of which we would have had no knowledge, provided that when I look at the fact that it seems that, and when I say fact, but the evidence suggests strongly that the Catholic Church in particular, and the Jesuits specifically, went on a major quest for the last 500 or 600 years to destroy previous history of mankind and any evidence thereof, and all the way up until modern times, including the Smithsonian Institution, with evidence of giants and previous civilization here in the United States, that there has been a concerted effort to destroy and to subvert every bit of ancient history and to create a fabricated history that overlays that. This indicates to me that there is something going on. It's probably from my perspective, um, less along the lines of a reality breakdown, and that we live in some sort of matrix or an unreal set of circumstances, but more along the lines of history that we've been told is so fraudulent that there could have been anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 years of which either there's no record, or it could be so terribly compressed that that the global flood that we've been told happened from Noah's Ark times. At this point, 3,500 to 5,000 years ago, could have been 1,500 years ago. Shit, dude, we don't know, and
Right.
that's what I'm saying is it's been so occulted that we have no idea. It could have been 10,000, 12,000 years ago.
And
I don't know.
the reality breakdown is, I mean, it's uncomfortable, at first, but then once I got suited to that, then I'll default to it sometimes, and I have to catch myself and go, no, well, Russell, like we didn't have the same technology. It's not like we had the internet. So, and like you said, all of these groups have been out to control knowledge. It's very possible that just something normal that we don't know happened. And then he always talks about the underlying numerology and stuff, and how the 33 must code itself in. And I'm partial to that idea. That really makes sense to me, not about the 33 so much, but how numerology would work itself out through reality. But it, that's like I feel like, is that myopic when you look at things like very singularly, like it must be a reality breakdown because there's no way I can't explain it. Is that
Well, let me take a little bit different tack. So I was just thinking yesterday that, for example, let's say that something occurred. Just pick your poison, but something occurred that caused this society to collapse, and we lost all electricity. Let's say there was a flood or some fire bombing or EMP or something happened
yeah.
that killed off a bunch of people, and the only people that survived were taken away. And immediately, their children were told a different story, and so immediately the story of what happened was changed. But without electricity, so consider that almost, and then they went on a concerted effort to destroy books. So from that moment, almost everything that we have record of now is done digitally. So all your bank account, all your banking transactions, so pretty much everything. So everything, for example, stored on a CD. Compact disc. If you were to find that later on, it would just be like this piece of plastic with shiny. If you didn't have the means to decode it, even if you were to understand that there were pits and valleys on it, if you were to look at it really closely and not have the methodology to understand and how to decode those ones and zeros and the format in which to do it, you wouldn't know that it had anything of value on it whatsoever. And
Mm.
so, with the loss of the electricity and the formatting in which that we have created our culture, you would have no way of knowing any that we had this high culture at all. And within 100 years or even less, you could destroy this. And the way that the buildings and architecture is done these days, if something catastrophic happened, you would have absolutely no way of knowing anything about the history of what occurred over the last 200 to 300 years
All you
whatsoever.
could do is
Nothing.
abstract it from art like they do with hieroglyphs, which is it's been proven that like that we got the best fucking people around trying to figure these hieroglyphs out, and we have an idea of what they're talking about, but I've seen where they've found ones and they're like, no, we thought it meant this, but actually it meant something completely different. um
And furthermore, what they're what anything that they're going to publicly say and reveal is probably again inaccurate.
oh
So
dude,
I don't even trust that.
yeah,
So
Egyptology is the fucking, it's like
the worst
the bee's knees of academic
bullshit.
bullshittery. Like
Yes.
they took it to a fucking level that even I think other people in the historical community or the anthropology community were watching these guys like, what? Holy shit, man! We could go even further. We could get away with bigger bullshit. Because look at what they just said.
That is the biggest pile of bullshit ever. Yes, that it's yes, Egyptology is the the pinnacle of absolute bullshit from top to bottom. So again, I just was thinking about this. I was driving to the store the other day, yesterday, as a matter of fact, just going, if we lost electricity and the means and method of understanding the formats in which we kept digital data, uh, you would know nothing about anything about our culture, and it could be done within 100 years. You could get two generations and tell them a completely different story, and they would be none the wiser as to what happened. And you could tell them anything you wanted, and they would have no choice but to believe it, because we inherently trust our those who teach us as children. And so once the story was delivered, that there would be no way of knowing. And if they did exactly what they do now, and anything that you find, you go, "Hey, this doesn't match your story," they go, "Oh, well," and they make up some bullshit story to give an excuse for it. It would be easy to do, and that this is what I think has been done. Is that there has been some pretty amazing things that's happened in this world, and we have very little idea about it. And what little evidence we have left has been so lied about for so long, at such a level that we're struggling to just now comprehend it. But again, this is where I come back to: anything that they tell us is crazy is probably closer to the truth. And anything they tell us we should believe is the furthest away from what we we should accept. And with that as a guidepost, I think that we have a better chance of at least getting a clue as to what's going on around us based on what's happened. And I think, from my perspective, trying better to understand the means and motives of those who are in charge helps me a great deal in better understanding what has gone on by understanding the methods that they've used to subjugate us. So as I do this awakening project, right, and I look closely at how people have been hypnotized
Mm-hmm.
into believing bullshit, and the way that they do it it's fascinating to me, and I've been able to uncover some pretty enlightening things about how easy we are to dupe. It is really easy to confuse people and to get them to accept things that are not true, and in fact, things that if you were to look at it with an adult mind, you would immediately recognize it as bullshit. But you are taught it at such an early age that it sinks in, and you are in a position to accept it, and all the adults around you accept it. So it's very much as if everybody still believes in Santa Claus. It's the easiest metaphor.
And it's a positive feedback loop. Like,
Yes.
if I'm studying astrophysics and I bring up, like, hey guys, we should talk about the three body problem. How can we accurately predict the orbit of, more than two bodies that are going around each other? It just falls to shit, and this is what our whole thing's based on. If I said that, they'd be like, negative feedback, you're bad, that's horrible, and I would get blackballed eventually if I kept saying it. Now, if
Sure.
I
If you apply just the basic inverse square law to anything that NASA tells you, from the Viking program to, I mean, the moon landings, if you just take the inverse square law and apply it to anything that they said they've done, you would know right away that everything they say is bullshit. That's just one physical law, one of the basics, right? So, but it is, as you say, it's a positive feedback loop in that everybody says that it's true, and that if you reject it, then you're an idiot,
and if I
and
write a
you
new
just don't
paper,
understand.
yeah, if I write a new paper on black hole theory, that's the most tired fucking load of bull. It's like the Egyptology of
Space,
astrophysics.
yeah,
and and
yeah,
if I showed you, and I posted this, I think, in Birds of a Feather, Eyes Open, and if you guys aren't a member of either of those groups, maybe go check them out on Facebook. But and it was an 11 or 14-year-old kid, and he made a new equation for a black hole to calculate something about black holes, and they gave him a seat in NASA in some like fucking special tour, and put him on some project. And I'm just thinking, like, this kid, they made his life to him. And then to you and me, we're looking at this going, God, what a fucking shame. I can't believe they would do this.
yeah. It's despicable. Yeah. Yeah, it is the worst kind of the worst is to lie to children, right? And that's what's been done from the outset when they teach us about this spinning ball in space. Yeah, I mean, just even considering the idea that that it's supposed to be spinning on a tilted axis. So you just look very quickly at gyroscopes and understand the way that they work. You would understand immediately that rim velocity would cause it to go off kilter. You would lose the moment. It's just it's absurd, and just at
Yeah.
every level. So the fact that people defend it and still believe it is not only remarkable, but again is another indication of how powerful the Dunning-Kruger effect is. That when again this positive feedback loop, when you tell people that they're smart because they reiterated and regurgitated something back, that makes them smart, and anybody who says otherwise is stupid. They stick to that, and they're not thinking it through. Right, as soon as you think it through, you're like, oh, that's bullshit.
Well, it's that they have the false impression that they have the skills to actually determine if this is false or true, or what the metric is. Like, that
Yeah,
isn't that what's going on? I mean, it's that
yeah, it's
they
yeah, and again,
they think they
the
know
whole
what's
idea of
up.
Dunning-Kruger is that you lack the skills necessary to understand to assess your own skill set, right? So but they teach it. This is the reinforcement that they give in the indoctrination centers, also known as schools. That what the what the skill sets are is the ability to just accept and regurgitate the things that they tell you. As soon as you try to break it down and think it through logically, that's immediately offered negative feedback. So you're bad, you're a troublemaker, and so they only reward those who accept and regurgitate, and it's disgusting. It makes me violently angry to think it through and understand what's being done, and yet nobody really, even the teachers, don't challenge it. It's their job to get kids to pass these tests, right? So they just have to do well on standardized tests, and so that's the measure of success, not whether or not they can think logically and rationally. Even they think they're doing a good job.
They've
It's
they've all but buried the trivium. Like I spoke to my, and I just understand it basically. It's grammar. You understand what something's called, what the words mean. Logic. You understand, like, logically, reasonably, how does this work? And then rhetoric would be like the social or the, like, consensus, what the group has to say about it, and you kind of simmer those down into the truth. Is that basically what it is?
Yeah.
And then so I brought this up to my philosophy teacher. I said, yeah, like the trivium, and he was like, yeah, well, sometimes some people still use the trivium, but usually we don't use that anymore.
Yeah, it's
and
overrated and blah blah blah.
and I was just like, dude, I didn't say anything because I was like, what do you mean sometimes we still, isn't that like the way that education and science is supposed to work?
Well, just like Michio Kaku says, right? None of my peers use the scientific method. It's all leaps of logic and seat of the pants. Um, they've completely rejected and divorced themselves from the scientific method, and yet they have the temerity and the hubris to say that they're scientists.
Oh yeah,
It's
that's none of his peers do because he's hanging out in the fucking bathhouse with Neil disgrace Tyson, smoking pole for frickin' half-assed calculus theories
yeah,
with
right.
500
And, and
ifs.
and with that, my brother, I do have to run. It's been always delightful to talk to you and to explore these ideas. I know that we never come up with any solid conclusions other than they're fucking us.
They're fucking us, bro. That's as far as we can tell. But
Yep.
yeah, God bless you, Baldini.
Hey, take care, man. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
For sure. Have a great day.
Hey, take care.
Peace.